Hello, I'm Janet Morena, the Executive Director of Priests for Life. And of course, we're still at home, aren't we, with this pandemic. And of course, I know in some states, we're starting phase one, where these programs are filmed here in Florida. We have begun phase one, which is a few things are opening up. I can tell you our restaurants are opening with only 25% capacity. Of course, our hair salons and nail salons are still closed. So see, my nails are not nicely done and my hair is kind of getting all crazy. But we're managing. Schools, of course, are closed, but I don't think any schools in the whole nation will go back this year, meaning this school year, and people are beginning to look for August and September when schools would begin to resume. Let's hope and pray that works out. And I hope these afternoons have been helpful to you, and also our other programming here on endabortion.tv. As you know, 10 o'clock in the morning, Father Pavone does the Mass, and then we have a little programming following that. 3 o'clock, hopefully you just joined us and you were able to take part in the Rosary and the Divine Mercy Chaplet. Of course, I come on at 3:30. And then, of course, when my segment is finished at 4 o'clock, we have an episode of The Catholic View for Women. Now, in case you missed the Mass this morning at 10, we repeat the Mass at 6 p.m., followed by a Holy Hour at 7. And, of course, my segment here repeats at 8 and The Catholic View for Women at 8:30. So I hope you're using this time at home to join us for these different broadcasts. Well, as I mentioned before, that I've been going back into our archives to a series that Father Pavone and I did for Sky Angel called The Gospel of Life. And we had a lot of good programming and good guests. And some of these topics, as they say in the TV business, are what they call evergreen. Today's topic is a difficult one because we're going to talk about miscarriage. And you know, when you think about miscarriage, very often I think people use the wrong phrases when we deal with miscarriage, don't they? When you think about it. You know, how many times people say, oh, I guess that was for the best. Or, oh, you know, I guess nature took its course. Well, for goodness sakes, would you say that to someone who just lost their child if the child was maybe a couple of months old? Oh, that was for the best, or I guess nature took its course? Of course you wouldn't. You would be grieving with them. You would be saying, oh, I'm so sorry. You would be having Mass cards probably, you know, for that child. There would probably be a wake and a funeral, et cetera, et cetera. So how come with miscarriage, we just like seem to fuzz over about it? We treat it differently somehow. So that's what we're going to be talking about. It's a very serious topic to talk about today. And I know some of our people watching, you might have suffered from miscarriage. One of my daughters had a miscarriage, and I know how it feels. It's devastating. You know, again, we believe that every life is sacred from the moment of conception to natural death. And if that's truly what we believe, the language we use and how we treat parents who lose a child from miscarriage is also very important. So let's look right now at this Gospel of Life show where we're going to talk to a couple and actually their parish priests and how they dealt with miscarriage. So
what is the appropriate response of the church and the pro-life movement to miscarriage? Find out next on Gospel of Life. Hello, I'm Father Frank Pavone, Director of Gospel of Life Ministries. Welcome to our program. We're joined as usual by our Associate Director, Janet Morena. Brothers and sisters, there is a deep prejudice in our society against the unborn child. We see that most dramatically in the ongoing tragedy of abortion. But even in the way in which we speak about the unborn in reference to pregnancy and in reference to miscarriage, we also see so often this lack of awareness that we're talking about a real person with real rights and dignity. Janet, today we're going to talk to our special guests, Sean and Kambra Malone from Columbus, Ohio, who have been through an experience that we have also seen in many other couples across the country, that they've lost the child by miscarriage and have wanted to show that child the dignity and the preciousness that the child deserves, and have encountered some people who understood that and others who didn't.
That's right. You know, it's very sad to say that most people don't even realize they have a right to ask for their child's remains, you know, when they have a miscarriage. And cases like the Malones, it's really a great hope for us to be able to tell other couples, you know, look, if this happens, you have rights here. This is your child. And it's sad, but in the death of your child, you have to stand up for that child and fight in order to have a proper burial.
Well, they gave a marvelous example by what they did through this experience, and now they've started a ministry to help other couples to do the same. So let's talk with Kambra, who's joining us by phone from Columbus, Ohio. Kambra, great to have you on the program.
Thank you for having us, Father.
When I first met you, we, together with your husband, Sean, discussed the experience that you had in the pregnancy and then the loss of Gabriel Francis, your baby. Tell us what happened.
I was around 13 weeks pregnant. They couldn't find the baby's heartbeat. So my physician took me to the ultrasound room to find out that our baby had indeed died. At that point, that's when things really kind of started spinning out of control. We left the doctor's office. Our first call was to our own parish. And honestly, the priest at our parish at that time told us to call the hospital to see what they would do.
Well, what were you asking the priest when you called him?
We wanted to have a burial, a mass, a funeral mass, and a burial for our baby. You know, we believe, of course, that life begins at conception. But, you know, I had also seen this baby already 3 times on ultrasound, which I think is such a powerful tool.
Yes, yes.
And so that's what we asked of our priest when we called. We were asking for a funeral, mass, and burial. You know, I'd never had a loss before. I had no idea what the protocol would be.
Right.
So upon his advice, he told us to call the hospital. I didn't want to call the hospital. I knew what the hospital would say. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, we found ourselves flipping through the yellow pages trying to figure out what we were going to do now with this baby.
And the baby at this point was still inside of you. So
yes.
Here you and your husband know the baby has died. We want to have a proper burial and funeral. Who's going to help us? And it sounds like your priest was somewhat taken by surprise by this request.
Very much so.
But then, Kambra, how were you able to arrange then, make the arrangements?
My first phone call through the yellow pages was to the Catholic cemeteries of Columbus. And once I made contact with them, they, you know, I felt crazy. I said, you know, I have this baby, 13 weeks, I don't know what to do. And they really put my mind to rest in saying that, yes, many babies have been buried there at that age, and that indeed we could bury our baby there. But then my next step was, how can I find a priest who's going to support this? Mm-hmm. Who's going to say the Mass for us? And that is when we have been longtime friends with Father Blubaugh. You know, he was at a parish well over an hour away from where we lived. He had his own parishioners to take care of, but I made the phone call to him. And once I made the contact with Father Blue, from there on out, he took care of everything.
Well, Father Blue was ready for this, and we're going to talk to him in the second part of our program. Sounds like the cemetery professionals were ready as well. So talk to us about how did you feel during those 2 days when you had your now deceased child within you? Were those positive moments, or to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, honestly, at first, I felt very strange. And then, you know, to think that this baby that we thought was, you know, was going to come into our home, be with our family, with our children, I had all those feelings of deep grief and disappointment. And then I did have a thought in my head that probably many mothers have that have found out that their babies have died, that, you know, this is their body, it deserves respect, but that their soul is already in heaven. And I really had to comfort myself with that thought. And also, I found myself really cherishing those moments until I went to the hospital to have that baby. Because even though that was only that child's body, that was the closest I would be to that body for a long time. And that may sound strange to some people, but being a mother, that's something that's very, very cherished.
That's very, very special, yes.
Yeah.
How were you able, Kambra, to arrange things now with the hospital? Because I know with a lot of couples, I hear that that's the biggest hurdle too, is getting your child's remains from the hospital.
When we got there, I was taken back by myself, which I think is very inappropriate for someone who was mourning the loss of their child. I sat for at least 45 minutes sitting in a chair crying. We were trying to express to the hospital personnel that we wanted to take the remains of our baby, leave them at the hospital in the morgue, where most people go when they die, and have Father Blue or the cemetery pick up the remains of our baby for funeral, mass, and burial. Not once, not twice, but 3 times we had people come in my room. They never, ever referred to our baby as a baby. It was constantly our conceptual remains, which was absolutely appalling to me.
Yes. And we're talking, Kambra, about a Catholic hospital, right?
This is a Catholic hospital in the Columbus area, yes. They acted like they had never had a request like this before. There was a bunch of whispering, scurrying, and I'm getting ready to go back to have this baby. I am very upset. My husband finally comes back. When he comes in to hear that they're referring to his child as conceptual remains, he was visibly shaken and quite upset. So the long and the short of it is, I go back to have the baby. When I come out and I'm alert and my husband is finally reunited with me, my question to my husband was, because it wasn't settled before I went in, where is the baby?
Mm-hmm.
And Sean had to look at me and say, the baby is in the trunk of the car.
Wow. Wow. Well, why don't we get Sean on the line, because I know he's got his perspective of this experience to share with us, both the positive and the negative aspects of it. Sean, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on, Father Pavone.
Kambra has done very well in sharing the initial experience. Tell us what this was like from your perspective.
I was devastated. And again, as Kambra said, I came home and we just didn't know what to do. This wasn't grandma. This wasn't somebody who had cancer, who had been sick for a very long time. It was totally unexpected. And we just found ourselves looking for resources. And when we called our parish priest, and he, in our minds, okay, that's not a resource now, because he told us something that we didn't want to do. We were just scurrying, like Kambra said, through the yellow pages. What really hurt the most was at the hospital, because we had worked it out with our doctor. Our doctor knew our wishes. Our doctor was fine with our wishes and encouraged us to do that. But when I came back, as I was, asking Kambra how she was doing, the nurse came in again and asked Kambra and myself, now I want to make sure you're asking for the conceptual remains. I really didn't understand that term. I wasn't expecting it. I thought they meant the placenta, the umbilical cord, something like that.
Right.
And I said, no, we just want the baby. She kind of had this look of like, oh, well, now what do I do? Because he said the same thing she said. And it wasn't like, okay, we understand and that's fine. It was like this look of, oh, man, what do we do with these people?
Yeah, this was something unusual for them. So after the surgery, they gave you the baby, in fact, in one of these bags.
The doctor came out, and he asked me to come back in the room, and he told me that, the surgery went well, as could be expected. Mom was doing fine, and he had something for me. So I said, okay, and he pulled out a white garment bag, like you would take, your clothes home from a surgery or from the hospital then. And then inside of that bag, he pulled out an orange Ziploc, bright orange Ziploc bag with a skull and crossbones that said biohazard waste on it. Mm-hmm. And he said, I have your baby.
So what we see here is ultimately your wishes were accommodated, but I get the word that comes to my mind in the course of all this, besides, of course, insensitive, is just clumsy. The whole thing was clumsy. And this now is part of what you and Kambra are doing now is to, and we want to join with you in doing this, is to help to sensitize people in the various professions, the clergy, the medical professions, the hospitals, the cemeteries, to sensitize them to the needs of couples like you to have a proper, respectful, dignified burial for children who die before birth. Well, welcome back. We're going to talk now with Father Blue, who helped Sean and Kambra Malone to deal with their miscarriage and their request to give a proper burial and funeral to their child. Father Blue, thanks for joining us on the program today.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure to be here.
Tell us about the day that you received the call from the Malones. Had you encountered this request before to have a funeral for a miscarried child?
I have done that with occasional families in the past when they have come to where I was assigned in the parish, and this was a family I knew as friends, and I think the response should be as helpful to a family in need as strangers as well as to those who are friends and you know their family.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of us clergy need to look at this is not a time to get excuses or be reluctant, but to be terribly wonderfully interested in this family going through a horrible crisis. And we can't afford ever to say, I don't care, I'm not interested, we don't do that. But how can we plan and talk about a ceremony that's kind of fitting in this difficult time? And that opens the door for these people to speak and say what they honestly feel is little things that help them through their crisis, and of course the proper condolences and expressed and to put them in a mode just to be able to talk.
Yes.
But unfortunately, sometimes they are told we don't do this. And I just heard this story today,
Mm-hmm.
and they're sent away in tears, and you can't do that.
So, Father, what did you end up doing? Did you have tell us about the ceremonies that were held for Gabriel Francis?
Well, we found that that as we talked about it in the several days after he was delivered, that we had several days to plan this, so it wasn't like a tomorrow or next day thing. We found that going to having a ceremony in a Catholic cemetery chapel covered all the bases of meeting friends before the ceremony, whether the coffin be open or closed. It was open for Gabriel, and the siblings had a part in the ceremony, and everybody who came thought it was a very sensitive ceremony. And in our clergy book, the Rite Order for Christian Burials, was 65 pages of ceremonies for infant funerals and burials, and some of the clergy seem totally unfamiliar with that.
Mm-hmm.
Do an adult version. It's not an adult version. It's a unique, the prayers, the readings, and everything. We need to begin to be sensitive to hurting families, whether they are registered or we know them, they're strangers, or sometimes they're friends. And so the whole thing was, when could we begin planning this, and what would you like to have, not what I insist you do that doesn't fit.
Yes, exactly. And that's what being a pastor is all about, really. And it sounds like you really encouraged the Malones and
Right.
really gave an example to all of us about how to handle a situation like this. So we're very grateful to you for your example in this particular instance.
Right, and we can't just say it's up to you, and we can't send people away in tears. It's between you and the funeral director, as if we don't do any such thing. I think that the clergy got to become sensitized. It's very critical that we respond and take the time and get ourselves involved in this, and not just somebody else on the staff as the pastoral associate. We have to take these difficult ones ourselves and meet with the people and plan to spend several hours, not just appear at the time of the funeral service.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much, Father. And as you know, of course, Sean and Kambra have used this personal experience to launch an entire ministry to reach out to couples in similar circumstances. So we'd like to have Kambra now explain a little bit about what has blossomed from this and is working in the Columbus area, and which now we want to promote also nationwide. It's called Back in His Arms Again. And Kambra, did you ever think that this experience of the miscarriage would lead you and your husband into an entire ministry of this sort?
Never. If someone would have asked me in the year 2005 if I would be working for this ministry for life in this capacity, I would have said no, thank you, and walked away.
What do you actually do then for couples who experience miscarriage?
We do anything and everything they need. But to name a few examples, what we have done is worked very closely with the Catholic cemeteries of Columbus. We've brought many resources together in our community as far as burial legates, having caskets on hand, having good relations with many churches by reaching out and speaking to their Respect Life groups. And, of course, we're very blessed to have Father Blue, who is also listed in our pamphlet and available 24/7 to any family who might need him.
Well, you and Sean felt very alone, very much distressed. And now, of course, you are making sure that other couples will not feel alone. So we look forward to working with you, with so many others around the country, so that we can treat the unborn child as a full person, both in the circumstance of miscarriage and in every other circumstance as well. So thank you for your witness, and thanks for sharing your story with us today.
Well, thank you, Father Frank. It was really an honor and a pleasure.
Janet, this is a wonderful thing, and we invite our viewers to go to our website. They will be able to see the website that the Malones have set up for Back in His Arms Again, and they will also be able to see the resources they can use in situations like this.
That's right.
And thank you, brothers and sisters. Stay with us now. We will be back for our action segment.
One of the most important things we can do in the pro-life movement is to pray. And one of the most popular pro-life prayer books is In the Palm of His Hand, written by Father Frank Pavone, National Director of Priests for Life. Now, we are pleased to offer a revised version of the popular prayer book containing brand new prayers and litanies that Father Frank has written to correspond to various liturgical seasons and feasts. You'll also find pro-life reflections of the Rosary, pro-life litanies, and also prayers for Eucharist adoration and prayer vigils at abortion mills, and much more. This devotional tool is great for personal, family, and parish use. Order it on our online store at prolifeproducts.org or by calling us at 321-500-1000. Again, order it at prolifeproducts.org or by calling us at 321-500-1000. Thank you. Again, Kambra and Sean Malone, what a brave couple, weren't they? And what they were faced with. But you see, notice how with them too, look what happened with the doctors and the hospital, how they were just like so, unthinking, not caring. For the doctor, it was just, matter of factly, like, okay, well, the baby died, we're just going to take care of this. We're just going to go in and deal with it. And they had to really, ask for the remains of their child. And then they treated it like, oh, this was just the products of conception. How cruel. How terrible. But they were so lucky to have that caring priest, right, who made sure that he gave that baby a proper burial and a Catholic funeral. And so you might be saying to me, well, Janet, how can we make this happen? Well, you've got to speak up, point one, all right? You have certain rights, and, when you've miscarried that child, before you go into the hospital for the doctor to do a procedure, you have to lay it all out ahead of time and say to them that this is our child that's, been lost, and we want the remains of our child. And make sure you contact your parish priest ahead of time. I know in some dioceses they even have special places in the Cemetery of the Angels, where they will bury miscarried children. In the Malone's case, I believe they had a family plot. They had that baby buried in. So don't kind of allow people to kind of push you down the road. This is not a biomedical waste. This is your child. You have a right to the burial of that baby, and you have a right also to get a Catholic funeral for that baby. So be in touch with, of course, Kambra and Sean. What they did was they took their experience of what happened to them, and they turned it into a beautiful ministry they have, which is Back in His Arms Again. And you can just Google that on the internet and be in touch with the Malones, because they unfortunately lost more than one child to miscarriage. And they have been advocates for families all over the country and help families who were put into these circumstances where they were almost going to get pushed into not getting a funeral or not getting the remains of their child. So again, it's Back in His Arms Again is the name of their ministry, and I highly recommend you to be in touch with them. Now, for those of you, of course, who've been fortunate not to have had a miscarriage, like I said before, How you treat other friends and family who've had miscarriages is very important at that moment when it happens. So I'm going to say to you a few things. You should treat that situation, like I said in the beginning, as if the baby was born and alive for months or even a few years, right? React the same way. Even if it was a very early miscarriage, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, like it was in the case of the Malones and some other people I know, it doesn't matter whether it was 7 weeks or 7 months. React the same way. They've lost a child. They're grieving. You should have a mass said for that baby. If they're going to have a funeral, please go to the wake, go to the funeral, see what you can do to help. Ask, do you need anything? Maybe cook a meal and bring it over for that mom. Behave as if it happened to a child, like I just said, that was a few years old. Act the same way because they are grieving the exact same way. And how we react also will also, it teaches other people around us the sacredness and the sanctity of that little life. So a lot to be learned about miscarriage. And you can go to our Priest for Life website and you Google the word miscarriage. We have a lot more resources up there, a lot more information, because you can make a difference in a woman's life who's lost a child to miscarriage by the way you react and about the way you reach out to touch them and to really help that healing. It's just not something they get over 1, 2, 3, and it's our reaction. Okay, friends and family can either help that couple to heal quicker or cause that trauma to last even longer. It's our participation and our understanding of the grief that they're going through when they lost a child to miscarriage. So I hope you learned something today by this program. And again, be in touch with us at Priests for Life. And also, go to our website. We have a lot of resources at priestforlife.org. And also, too, I don't want to remiss to tell you that we can't bring all this programming without my great staff that helps. We have editors. We have people helping with the broadcast. So if you'd like to make a donation to our ministry, we also would greatly appreciate it. Go to prolifegift.org where you can leave a donation. And right now, you're going to stay tuned in a little bit for another episode of The Catholic View for Women. So thank you and God